Hey guys, tonight we quietly step through the dusty stones of myth, back to when sandals scraped Cretan roads and threads hinted at ancient escape plans. You're not here to slay a beast or flirt with a prince. You're here to walk beside Ariadne, thread in hand, heart quietly ticking, as you map the most misunderstood maze in history, the Labyrinth. But don't worry. This isn't the kind of story where you get eaten at the end. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Crete long before the myths learned how to roar. This isn't the Crete of angry gods and doomed lovers, not yet. No, the air smells of warm bread and olive leaves. You're standing at the edge of a hillside terrace, watching women in flounced skirts gossip near the wine jugs. Sunlight clings to everything. Stone paths twist like sleepy vines through open courtyards, and despite what future poets will say, things feel peaceful here, boring, even, which is exactly what you came for. The Minoan world hums rather than shouts. You wander through a world where religion is more likely to involve honey cakes than lightning bolts. Priests tend their rituals under trees instead of temples. The sea, ever present and never in a hurry, licks at the coast with glassy patience. Most Cretans, by the way, have never heard of minotaurs. What they do know is livestock, especially bulls, sacred ones, painted onto jars and walls, honored in springtime rituals. But as you pass a pottery stall, you overhear a merchant whispering about a queen's unusual affection for one. You politely move on before that gets weirder. The king, Minos, is said to rule with both command and compromise. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His kingdom's influence spreads with cargo ships and clever marriages. Historians still argue whether this Minos was a single man or a dynastic title passed down like a crown and possibly a headache. But to the people on the street, Minos is a fact like the sky ever there, mildly intimidating and capable of surprising storms. You step into a villa where walls are painted with leaping dolphins and saffron crocuses. A girl walks by with a tablet of linear A script in her hand, still undeciphered today. By the way, you try not to stare, but your modern brain is chewing on the idea that this entire civilization, once so advanced, left behind a language that no one can fully read. It's like finding a well-organized filing cabinet and realizing every label is an emoji. In the kitchens, you catch a whisper about the new architect, a quiet man from Athens named Daedalus. He's arrived to build something. It's something secret, something enormous. One cook swears she saw him measuring shadows with a spoon. Another says he talks to birds. But that's for later. Right now, it's the calm before complexity. The palace hasn't yet grown its impossible corridors. The myths haven't started tying knots, and Ariadne is still a child, somewhere in the background, perhaps braiding threads or tracing chalk circles while no one's watching. You pass a marketplace, half asleep in the heat. A man trades sheep for dyed wool. A woman scolds a chicken. Someone tries to sell you a very ugly figurine that may or may not be a fertility idol. You decline with a nod. The landscape rolls in ochre and gold, dotted with fig trees and grazing goats. You follow a dusty trail down to the sea, where fishermen mend their nets with rhythmic fingers and no urgency at all. One hums a tune that's older than drama, older than tragedy. Just a fishing song with no chorus, no ending, and no need for either. It's hard to believe that this serene island will one day echo with legends of half-human beasts, betrayed daughters, and lost heroes. But myths are slow to bloom. First come the quiet days, the dull routines, the overlooked afternoons. You're living in those now. You're the silence before the story, the shadow before the flash of bronze. Oh, and one more thing. Though Crete seems sleepy, don't let the calm fool you. There are eyes behind tapestries, prayers beneath floor tiles, and yes, blueprints forming in the mind of a man who's about to make history very difficult to navigate. For now. Though, the island naps. You lie back on a woven mat under a pear tree, listening to bees discuss their route from blossom to blossom. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic. Just beyond the hills, a corridor is being carved. But here, today, you have nothing to worry about except which direction the breeze is coming from. And even that hardly matters. You step inside the palace at Gnosis as if you've stepped inside a thought, one both tangled and clever, echoing with sandals on stone and the faint scent of wet plaster. The place doesn't announce itself with grandeur. It ambushes you gently, with split-level courtyards, unexpected staircases, and corridors that seem to pause mid-thought. A whispering building, a palace that changes direction even as you walk through it. Knossos is less like a fortress and more like a daydream that got way out of hand at its height. The structure sprawled across more than 1,000 rooms, stitched together by staircases that double back like shy cats. Light wells open into shadowy rooms. Storage chambers hide behind painted halls. You keep glancing behind you, unsure if you've already passed that same pomegranate motif 3 times. You pause at a wall where red-painted columns guard a fresco of athletes leaping over bulls. They float in the air with unnatural grace, noses idealized, torsos stretched like ribbon. Some archaeologists think it depicts a ritual called taurocathapsia, a sort of religious bull vaulting. Others think it's wishful nonsense painted by sports fans. Historians still argue whether these scenes reflect actual Cretan practice or were simply mythical decoration. Either way, it's oddly soothing to imagine acrobats flying through sunlit courtyards instead of dodging actual danger. The palace is more than a royal residence, it's a ceremonial brain, absorbing rituals and politics and gossip in equal measure. You pass a line of clay storage jars called pithoi, each nearly as tall as you. They once held grain, olive oil, maybe even wine, though the latter has certainly aged out of drinkability by now. These storage areas are vast, hidden below courtyards where sacred processions once stepped to the sound of reed pipes. As you wander, you notice something odd. There are no fortifications, no walls, no towers to shoot arrows from. Either the Minoans were deeply peaceful or deeply overconfident, or perhaps they had enough ships to keep any real threat at sea. You make a mental note never to underestimate a civilization that builds its defense strategy on vibes and navy. In a side corridor, your sandal scuffs a strange groove in the floor. You bend down. It's worn smooth, curved like a lazy S, probably a drainage channel, or perhaps something older, made by people pacing in thought. A guard walks by, yawning politely. The place is protected, yes, but mostly from time itself. You spot a shrine, unmarked, unguarded, just a small chamber with horns of consecration, a wooden platform, and the soft remains of something burned long ago. You feel like you've entered mid-whisper, a prayer left half said. The Minoans didn't carve gods into thunderbolts or oceans. They carved meaning into silence, into beeswax offerings, into bowls of milk left for snakes that no one wants to talk about. Then, the deeper you go, the more the light tilts. Torches flicker against cool walls. The corridors narrow. You stop relying on your sense of direction. It left 10 minutes ago, insulted by the number of turns. That's when it begins to feel familiar, not in layout, but in feeling. There's something intentional about the confusion, as if the walls are more than walls, as if the palace itself is a lesson or a joke. You start counting steps, then retracing them. You try to leave a trail of pebbles, but a goat casually eats them behind you. Classic. This place, you realize, doesn't care about your straight lines. It meanders, it folds, it plays. The word labyrinth hasn't entered your vocabulary yet, but the seed is here, buried in the strange efficiency of disorder. Some archaeologists believe the myth of the labyrinth came from Knossos, born of the palace's endless paths and overlapping levels. Others think it was retrofitted, legend first, location second. But the moment you lose your third right turn in a row, you start to suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. And still, there's no minotaur, no bloody altars, just the slow logic of movement and misdirection. The palace teaches you how to walk without assuming you'll arrive. It teaches you that circles are sometimes the point. Then, somewhere near a sunken stairwell that ends in nowhere, you hear a sound, soft, rhythmic, thread being spun. You don't know it yet, but Ariadne is nearby. Her room's tucked behind a fresco of lilies. She's not a princess in the dramatic sense. She's just a clever girl with a talent for remembering paths and a deep love for patterns. She listens more than she speaks. She doesn't run through halls, she glides, and when she walks the palace, it walks with her. But that's for later. For now, you find a bench worn smooth by waiting and sit. A lizard dashes by. Someone laughs far off. Could be a servant, could be a god. You lean back against the warm wall and close your eyes. Just for a second, somewhere beneath your feet, a new room is being added, and the corridors multiply. The woman at the center of every strange story in this palace doesn't greet you with thunder or tears. She simply sighs, tired of curses, tired of divine interference, tired of the way bulls keep showing up in her life uninvited. Pasiphae, queen of Crete, wife of Minos, and daughter of the sun god Helios, lives in a room where the curtains are always drawn just a little too tight. You find her seated in a painted alcove, surrounded by soft fabrics and the smell of bay leaves. Her hands are folded neatly in her lap. She is not screaming. That part has passed. She's been through the messy parts already, the impossible longing, the secret commission, the quiet months of concealment. Now she waits, contemplative, sipping water and staring into nothing. This is not a woman who asked for myth. This is a woman who was gifted divine absurdity like a prank fruit basket. Let's rewind. According to the more theatrical version of things, Pasiphae was cursed by Poseidon to fall in love with a bull. This, supposedly, was punishment for her husband Minos refusing to sacrifice said bull as promised. Historians still argue whether this was ever meant to be taken literally, or if it's one of those ancient metaphors gone wildly off-leash. Either way, the story stuck. And here's where things escalate awkwardly. Pasiphae, smitten, cursed, whatever you want to call it, allegedly seeks help from the palace's most uncomfortable genius, Daedalus. He's the sort of man who builds problems as easily as he solves them. She requests something peculiar. He doesn't ask too many questions. A large wooden contraption, shaped like a cow, is wheeled into the royal garden. We'll spare you the mechanics. You already know the result. The child born from that encounter isn't a child in the conventional sense. He has the body of a boy, the head of a bull, and a quiet that makes servants nervous. No one knows what to call him. He doesn't cry. He breathes like a bellows and grows like ivy in shade, slow but inevitable. Some stories call him Asterion, meaning starry one. It's oddly gentle. There's no rage in the name, just potential. At first, he's raised in the palace. Pasiphae sings to him, nurses feed him, children avoid him. Over time, the palace finds ways to pretend he doesn't exist. Eventually, even she stops visiting. That's when the labyrinth becomes necessary. You walk with Pasiphae one morning as she circles the garden, silent. The boy has been placed in the maze below, not as punishment, not even entirely out of fear, simply because no one knows what else to do with him. The maze keeps him alive, keeps others safe. It's the sort of compromise ancient civilizations excelled at quiet containment, masquerading as mercy. Pasiphae never says his name aloud, but she does pause when walking above the corridors, just once, just long enough to listen. The city whispers. Some say he eats people, others say he doesn't eat at all, just paces endlessly, rubbing his hands against stone until they bleed. Still others say he builds little sculptures from bones and dreams. You try not to speculate. One day, you see Pasiphae in the palace again, this time with a spindle, not thread for escape, just something to keep her hands busy. She sits beside a fresco of the sea and says nothing. Her eyes don't blink much anymore. There's a fringe theory, rarely mentioned, that the tale of Pasiphae and the bull was a symbolic warning against the loss of feminine autonomy in a society increasingly tilted toward patriarchal rule. That the Minotaur represented institutional shame, that the labyrinth was not a prison, but a silencer. But that's academic. Right now, you're watching a woman pick at her embroidery. You notice she's stitched something unusual into the corner, a tiny bull, nestled among vines. No one will notice it except you. Later that evening, a servant tells you a strange thing. She dreams in spirals now, they say, not lines. You don't know what to make of that. You pass by Daedalus once, too. He doesn't look proud. He looks tired. His hands are stained with wax and ash. He mutters something about functional complexity and drops a clay model. He doesn't pick it up. Pasiphae's story doesn't end with redemption. She isn't granted closure. She fades from the myth. A ghost wrapped in fabric, remembered only for her association with strangeness. But if you listen carefully to the wind threading through the corridors of Gnosos, you might still hear her, soft and steady, sighing as though the entire world is just one long, tedious misunderstanding. Before you leave her presence, she looks at you, not directly, just past you, really, as if searching for a version of her life that didn't involve gods, bulls, or labyrinths. And then she blinks, once, slowly, and returns to her stitching. Outside, the sky is turning to copper. You head toward the western chambers, stepping lightly, somewhere below. The Minotaur paces, one heavy breath at a time, somewhere above. The queen stops singing. You find Daedalus hunched beneath a fig tree, scratching spirals into a tablet with a stylus that looks too short to be comfortable. He doesn't greet you. He doesn't even look up. Instead, he mutters measurements, like a man half trapped in his own blueprints. 40 cubits west. Curve 3? No. That opens too soon. Then he sighs, blows the dust off the clay, and starts over. Daedalus, the famed artisan of Athens, is not at all what the myths promise. No sweeping cloak, no divine glow. Just a man in sandals, too, worn to belong to a genius, and eyes that blink like he's forgotten what day it is. He was brought here by Minos, not for art, not for statues, not even for a particularly elegant courtyard. No, he was brought to design the impossible, a structure so complex that no one, not even the builder himself, could reliably escape it. Not exactly a feel-good commission. You sit near him, silently, after a moment. He begins explaining his thought process. He gestures vaguely toward the palace with his stylus. It's not about getting lost, he says. It's about not finding the center. You see, confusion isn't a side effect. It's the goal. That, right there, is not something anyone should say lightly, according to the more flattering legends. Daedalus invented everything from sails to carpentry tools. Some even credit him with creating automatons, bronze machines that mimicked human movement. Others call him the first to truly understand three-dimensional space on an architectural level. Historians still argue whether Daedalus was a real engineer, a symbolic figure, or an amalgam of early Mediterranean craftsmanship. Regardless, what he designs next will outlive them all. The labyrinth, as he describes it, will be sunken partly underground, layered like an onion, and lit only by thin slits carved into high walls. No maps, no symmetry, no comfort. Dead ends, you ask? He grins. Which is a mistake. No. Worse, loops, and that's the problem. Not that people will stop, but that they will keep going, convinced they're getting somewhere, like trying to exit a roundabout, while blindfolded and surrounded by chanting architects. He shows you a model. It looks like a child's toy until you tilt it, then the trick becomes clear. Rooms overlap, walls curve inward, and stretch like paper folds. One passage leads nowhere, another doubles back on itself after 20 steps. At the center, or maybe not, sits a small chamber, no more decorated than a root cellar. You ask him if it's meant to be a prison. He shrugs. It's meant to contain. Then he hands you a thread. Pull it, he says. You do. The model collapses into itself, like a tired seashell. You look at him, startled. He just nods. That's the trick, isn't it? The difference between architecture and myth is tension. Later, you see him sketching near the palace cisterns. Not diagrams this time. Birds, gulls, swifts, doves, all mid-flight. He seems more relaxed when drawing things that don't live in hallways. I used to fly dreams, he murmurs. Now I just build traps. You wonder what version of this man Icarus knew, the inventive father or the exhausted designer, maybe both. Maybe that's the real tragedy, that Daedalus gave flight to his son only after spending years making sure no one else could leave. One afternoon, you follow him into the half-built maze. Workers haul limestone slabs. Others use primitive levels, bent wood and suspended plumb lines to measure tilt. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and the quiet murmur of men trying not to think about what they're building. Daedalus corrects a mason's angle, adjusts a notch, then steps back. This part should feel safe, he says. That way the panic will take longer. You raise an eyebrow. Too honest, asks. You don't answer. There's a strange moment as the light filters in, a spiral shadow on the floor. He stops and stares at it, as if surprised by something that he didn't design. For a heartbeat. You wonder if even he is starting to lose the thread. And then, calmly, he marks the spot with an X, not to fix it, just to remember it. You exit the unfinished maze with sore feet and a strange sense of reverence, not for the monster, not even for the myth, but for the blueprint, because Daedalus isn't creating a home or a prison or a temple. He's creating the physical version of a question with no answer. Later that evening, as the sky dims and the torches are lit, you find Daedalus again under the fig tree. He's asleep, finally, clay tablet resting on his chest. You think about waking him, then think better of it. The boy is led inside before sunrise. No procession, no fanfare, just two guards walking with soft sandals and a child between them who doesn't cry, doesn't look back. His head, bowl-shaped, heavy, bobs slightly with each step. His hooves are not cloven, but his stride is off-kilter. He hums something low and tuneless. One of the guards flinches. The other tightens his grip. They pass through the central gate into the labyrinth. No torches are lit behind them. You're not allowed inside that morning. No one is. Only Daedalus watches from a high window, lips pressed together in the way of men who realize they've built too well. The Minotaur, if anyone calls him that yet, shuffles forward without resistance. No chains, just the stone swallowing him like a mouth that never closes. The door shuts with a sound that's more final than loud. That's how it begins. For a while afterward, the palace pretends nothing happened. Meals are served, dancers perform, bulls leap through rings. But the garden near the labyrinth grows quieter. Fewer people pass it now. Even fewer speak while doing so. You find yourself drifting near it at twilight. There's no roar, no scratching, just a faint pressure in the air, like someone thinking very hard in a room far below, or rumors bloom. Of course, someone claims to have seen a chicken wander in and never come out. Someone else swears they heard a lullaby echo up from the stone. You learn quickly that everyone's afraid, but no one knows exactly what they're afraid of. You sneak closer one afternoon, slipping through an unattended side path, just enough to see the outer edge of the maze. Ivy crawls over the stones. You lean in and whisper, "Are you okay?" A long silence. Then a soft breath, a huge one, like a bellows filling with dust. You do not ask again. It becomes known, over time, that the boy is hungry. What kind of hunger? No one says directly. The tribute begins with animals, a goat, then a pig, then a pair of sheep. The animals never come back. Eventually, the offerings change. The legend that Athens must send youths as tribute, 7 boys and 7 girls, takes hold. Some say it was punishment for the death of Minos' son. Others think it was diplomacy dressed up in horror. Historians still argue whether these tributes ever truly occurred, or if the myth emerged to explain political subjugation. You, for your part, remain quietly unconvinced that any of it unfolded as neatly as the stories suggest. You meet one of the chosen, an Athenian girl with hair like midnight and a stare that defies every corridor. She tells you she volunteered. You're not sure if she means it. She asks what the Minotaur looks like. You describe him gently. She nods, unsmiling. No one discusses what happens inside the labyrinth. Survivors are rare. Stories are rarer. But you begin to notice something odd, not about the monster, but about the maze itself. The structure adjusts, slowly, as if reshuffling itself at night, corridors growing longer, or steps changing pitch. A servant swears he heard music one dawn, repeating patterns that made him forget how many turns he'd taken. The labyrinth is alive, or, at least, no longer entirely built. Daedalus avoids discussing it now. He mutters something once about how stone remembers too well. The Minotaur, still sometimes called Asterion, has become less of a creature and more of a story. The kind children whisper to each other with wide eyes. The kind palace guards refuse to joke about. You hear, occasionally, of people who try to map it. Scholars, drafters, curious fools. They enter with scrolls and ink. They exit with wild eyes and drawings that loop endlessly into themselves. Still, the quiet holds. Until one afternoon, you hear her voice, Ariadne. She's near the entrance, speaking not to the Minotaur, but to herself, repeating patterns, counting under her breath. Her thread, spun by hand, is wrapped around her wrist like a promise. She's not frightened, she's charting. And somewhere below her, the creature paces, unknowingly part of a plan that is not yet unspooled. Ariadne does not enter the labyrinth yet, not fully, not officially. She lingers at its edges, leaning near passageways when no one's looking, slipping bread or figs into the dark, listening for echoes and counting the seconds until they return. You find her one morning on a terrace above the maze, sitting cross-legged with a wax tablet in her lap and her head tilted slightly, as if listening to the wind recite geometry. She doesn't look like the heroine you remember from the myth. No crown, no dramatic robes. Her hair is tied with string. Her sandals are mismatched. She's muttering numbers to herself and nodding like she's reached a satisfying conclusion about left turns. She glances up and says, 3 short echoes means a fork, 5 means a loop. Then she shrugs, probably. Most people in the palace avoid even discussing the labyrinth. Ariadne, she treats it like a reluctant roommate. She's been curious about it since childhood. Her governess says she used to build miniature mazes out of sticks and fruit pits in the garden. Her nursemaid says she once tied ribbons around all the pillars in her room and declared it practice. Her brother is before he was confined. Used to follow her when she wandered the halls, not out of protection, but because she always found the hidden stairwells. And now, as a young woman, Ariadne's curiosity has not waned. It's sharpened, tempered, focused on the puzzle beneath her feet and the story that keeps curling tighter around her family. She speaks to the guards at the labyrinth casually, asking things like, "Did you hear a different breeze yesterday? Or does your torch burn faster near the 4th turn one of them?" A man missing 2 teeth confesses he once saw the Minotaur crouched quietly by a wall, not moving, just touching the stone like he was remembering something. Ariadne writes that down. Historians still argue whether Ariadne was truly the daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, or if she was a priestess absorbed into legend. But to you, sitting beside her as she braids twine into precise loops, she feels more like a cartographer, less myth and more methods. You ask her if she's afraid. She doesn't answer right away. She ties a new knot, stares at it, then says, "No one ever asks if he's afraid." That gives you pause. She's been mapping the maze not with parchment, but with memory. Footsteps counted, turns traced, breezes logged. She knows that every corridor has its own temperature, that certain echoes only bounce in the northern wing, that the eastern edge sometimes smells faintly of rosemary. And of course, there's the thread. Her spindle is made of olive wood, the thread, linen spun tightly and waxed, strong enough to pull a grown man out of a panic, long enough to follow a myth all the way to its end. She doesn't advertise it. She's not ready yet, but you can tell she's planning something. One night, you find her pacing a courtyard, threading and unthreading a skein across columns. A servant asks what she's doing. She replies, practicing confidence. You smile. She smiles back. Then she asks you a question. Do you think he dreams? You assume she means the Minotaur. You say yes. She nods. Good. I hope he dreams in spirals. They're easier to follow. You don't ask what she means. You're beginning to understand that Ariadne's thoughts aren't linear. They fold in on themselves, reflecting the maze she studies, the half-brother she can't unthink, and the escape plan she hasn't yet committed to. There's a small temple on the hill behind the palace, half collapsed and filled with bees. Ariadne goes there sometimes to sit. She never prays, she just listens. One day, she takes you there and points out a carving no one talks about, a star cradled by a thread. Faded, small, older than the palace. You ask if she carved it. No, she says, but someone like me must have. You both sit for a while. When you leave, she tucks a strand of thread into the stone. For later, she says, back in the palace. The corridors feel different, as if they're listening now. The Minotaur, for all his absence, is part of every conversation no one wants to start. But Ariadne starts them, with a whisper, with chalk, with string. Soon, she will meet a prince, but not yet. For now, she waits and watches and counts. It begins with a whisper of wool and wax. Ariadne sits at her low work table, fingers pulling a spindle's worth of thread into her lap, each loop steady and intentional. The thread is fine, hand-spun, sun-bleached, and waxed with a blend of olive oil and beeswax to keep it from fraying. She tests the tension with a tug, nods in satisfaction, and then winds it into a flat coil no larger than a fig leaf. You ask why she doesn't use dyed yarn. She grins. Too easy to follow. This one blends into the shadows. Ariadne is planning something, not theatrical, not loud. She's working on an escape, but more than that, she's building a relationship with the labyrinth itself. She knows how it breathes. She knows which turns make your ears pop, and which chambers echo with a pause that's a little too long. She's memorized the maze like a lullaby. This is not the Ariadne of later myths, the woman weeping on the beach, abandoned and lovelorn. This is the Ariadne before the prince arrives, the version who wraps her cunning in silence, who sharpens her wit by asking questions no one dares to answer. You walk with her one evening to the edge of the courtyard near the upper entrance. The guards nod without meeting her eyes. They know she's the king's daughter, but they also know better than to ask what she's doing with a basket of thread and a knotted stick. She kneels by the stone lip of the entrance and gently sets the basket down. Then she leans forward, whispering. You can't hear what she says. You think she's talking to the Minotaur or the maze itself. She doesn't bring scrolls or maps. She brings knots. The method is simple. One loop means left. Two knots mean right. A long twist means pause. The thread becomes her silent alphabet, a way of translating stone into understanding. Historians still argue Whether Ariadne actually invented the method of labyrinth escape, or whether it's a clever postscript added by storytellers centuries later to make her useful. You, having watched her hands work in the fading light, are pretty sure it's the former. One evening, she invites you to help test the thread. You walk side by side through a small courtyard, stretching the line between you like a quiet agreement. You count your steps. At the first pillar, she ties a loop. At the second, she hums. Every sound, she says, has a shape, and every shape can be remembered. She's already tested the tension. She's soaked part of the thread in seawater to make sure it stiffens when dry. She's burned the end to see how long it can withstand heat. She's even pulled it across rough stone to test for fray points. This isn't an art project. It's engineering. Back in her quarters, you see more spindles, half finished, some unraveled, others knotted into nonsense patterns that resemble constellations. One looks like a chicken, but you don't say that aloud. She's also made tools a spool that clips to the belt, wax beads for emergency rewaxing, and a small weight that helps her fling the thread over pillars when needed. You ask if she's ever shown anyone. She shakes her head. It works better when it's a secret. There's something beautifully subversive about her plan. The myth of the labyrinth is one of permanence, an inescapable place built to contain. But Ariadne, with her quiet hands and stubborn knots, is slowly, softly rewriting the ending. The palace is changing. You can feel it. The servants speak more carefully. The air near the maze feels charged, like static before a storm. Even the olive trees are dropping their fruit early. And yet, in Ariadne's room, the only sound is thread sliding through fingers. She doesn't speak much about the Minotaur these days, but once, over a bowl of warm milk, she says, "I don't want him dead. I just want him not here." You nod. There's no word for that kind of mercy in the language of the palace that night. She lights a lamp and traces her finger across the windowsill, as if measuring the stars against her plan. You sit with her in silence. Eventually, she ties one last knot and says, almost to herself, "Now I'm ready." Theseus arrives like thunder in a pottery shop. Ariadne is just finishing her morning thread count when the first whispers reach the palace. The tribute ship from Athens has docked, and among the trembling youths is a young man who walks like he's auditioning for immortality. Broad shoulders, windswept curls, sandals too clean for someone claiming to be humble, the sort of man who forgets to say thank you when handed a second chance. You watch from the gallery as he enters the palace. He doesn't bow. He waves, to Minos, to guards, possibly to a statue. You'd think he was here to fix a leaky roof, not confront a beast in a maze. The servants notice. One calls him that shiny one, another mimes tripping him. Ariadne, however, watches with narrowed eyes and quiet calculation. She doesn't swoon, she studies. Theseus introduces himself with a grin and a boast he's volunteered to kill the Minotaur. Not survive it, not sneak past, kill. Ariadne raises one eyebrow and says nothing. Historians still argue whether Theseus actually volunteered or was offered as a symbolic gesture by Athens to appease Minos and show defiance cloaked in sacrifice. Whatever the truth, Theseus acts like he's already in a mural. At dinner, he eats too loudly. He says things like, "When I slay him, and I've fought worse." He flexes unintentionally every third sentence. One poor flute player faints from second-hand embarrassment. You sit beside Ariadne as she listens, expression unreadable later in the garden. She finally speaks to him. It goes like this: Theseus, do you know how to navigate by echo? He blinks. By what echo? He frowns. Is that a type of torch? She sighs. Still. She offers him the thread, not out of romance, not yet, out of logic. He's the only one both arrogant enough to try and lucky enough to stumble through. If she's going to test her method, he's as good a guinea pig as any when she explains how it works. He nods as if he already thought of it. Ah, yes, thread, very clever. I was just about to suggest something similar. You bite the inside of your cheek. Ariadne explains the knots, the rhythm, the need to hold constant tension. He seems more interested in whether the string is flame resistant. That night, she shows you the belt she's made for him. It loops through a small spool, weighted just enough to keep from tangling. She's marked it with a symbol, a bullseye made of stars. You ask her why she's helping him. She says, because I can't keep pretending the maze will solve itself. You point out that Theseus might leave her behind. She shrugs. If he does, I'll still have the thread. You hear him that evening practicing with a spear, stabbing at imaginary monsters while making exaggerated sounds of exertion. At one point, he yells, "Take that, foul beast," and knocks over a jug of wine. It's not reassuring. But Ariadne is calm. She isn't betting on Theseus's sword. She's betting on her own math, the morning of the descent. She hands him the thread with deliberate slowness. Remember, she says, don't pull too tight. If you break it, you stay broken. He winks. Got it. You both watch him walk into the labyrinth, half hero, half hazard. She doesn't pray. She just listens. 36 heartbeats later, the thread tugs once, then again, and then it goes still. The night creeps over Knossos like a soft-spoken secret. Torches flicker low along the palace walls, and the city exhales. You and Ariadne sit on a ledge above the entrance to the labyrinth, the thread spooling slowly through her fingers. It tightens, loosens, tightens again. He's moving. She murmurs. You nod, though it's hard to know for sure. The silence that follows has a texture to it, dense and listening. You're not sure whether the labyrinth breathes, or if it simply holds its breath until you're too deep to notice. She stands slowly, and you follow her along the edge of the maze's perimeter. This isn't a stroll, it's a calculation. Each step is measured, each echo caught like a whisper in a net. Every part of the maze has a voice. She tells you. The stones shift the sound in different ways. Listen long enough, and you can hear when you're near a corner. You tilt your head, distantly. The thread hums between your fingers. It turns out that mapping the labyrinth isn't about direction, it's about presence. Ariadne walks with the ears of a musician and the patience of a cartographer. Every heel click, every toe brush tells her something. The slight drag in the thread's tension means Theseus just stepped over a slope. The faint vibration, a turn, the cold spot on the wind. He's reached the lower chambers. She scribbles on a wax tablet as she walks. Not words, just marks, arcs and spirals that mean something to her and no one else. It's less like map making and more like following a melody only she can hear. You pass a cracked pillar wrapped in faded ivy. She pauses, places her hand against it, then turns left, away from the palace, toward a ledge you've never noticed. From there, she points downward. There, she says. That's the dead end near the center. You peer down. Nothing but shadow and stone. She's right. No one taught Ariadne this. She taught herself, thread by thread, step by step, by watching how servants turned corners, how lost goats doubled back, how echoes changed after rainfall. She memorized the maze the way a spider memorizes its web. A guard appears near the entrance. Confused, is something wrong, my lady? She doesn't answer. Instead, she gently tugs the thread once, twice. Then she listens. The return pull comes, a signal from Theseus, faint, deliberate. He found something, she says, or someone. She doesn't say the Minotaur. That name carries too much weight, too many stories, and none of them kind. But in your mind, you picture the creature crouched in the half-light, not snarling, just watching, perhaps recognizing Theseus not as an enemy, but as a disruption to the quiet loops of his endless pacing. You ask her if she's afraid Theseus will fail. Ariadne frowns. He doesn't need to succeed. He just needs to come back. Then she turns, walking again, eyes fixed on the tension in the thread. At one point, she pauses and says, "This turn, it doesn't echo the same anymore. He's near the southern bend. You don't hear anything." She does, later. She halts near a notch in the courtyard floor. She pulls a small tile loose and marks it with chalk, 2 swirls and a cross. You don't ask what it means. The maze shifts, not physically, but perceptually. Your eyes begin noticing details you missed before: grooves along the lower bricks, subtle inclines, spots where torches never stay lit. Ariadne runs her fingers along the thread, whispering, still moving, slower now. He's close. The sky above begins to pale at the edges. Morning creeps forward, but the maze does not yawn. It remains alert, deliberate. Suddenly, the thread jerks, hard. Ariadne stiffens, then another tugs, more rhythmic, short, measured. "That's his signal," she whispers. "He's turning back." You both freeze, breath caught between hope and disbelief. The thread pulls again, once, twice, then steady tension, drawn hand over hand as if reeled by fate itself. You grab part of the spool and begin to help, guiding the thread smoothly over the stone lip of the entrance. Ariadne moves with practiced calm, her eyes never blinking. We have about 10 minutes. You glance into the opening and wait. 10 minutes stretch like thread across stone, thin, tense, and whispering promises it may not keep. You and Ariadne hold the line between your palms, feeling each tiny movement. A shift here, a pause there, a slow, steady tug as the labyrinth gives up its guest inch by grudging inch. The air around the entrance hangs still. Even the birds seem reluctant to interrupt. Then, footsteps, not galloping, not triumphant, just the steady patter of leather on stone, a slow rhythm, a survivor's rhythm. One heel, one toe, one breath at a time. Theseus emerges into the light with no roar, no grin, no dramatic flourish. His tunic is torn at the sleeve. Dust clings to his hair, and the thread dangles like a second spine behind him. In one hand he holds a broken spear. In the other, nothing. He says nothing for a long moment. He just breathes. Then he looks up at Ariadne. It's done. She doesn't nod. She doesn't speak. She steps forward, cuts the thread gently at his waist, and lets it fall into a basket lined with fleece. You ask him, eventually, how it happened. He shrugs, still winded. He didn't charge. He just stood there, watching, like he was waiting. You glance at Ariadne. He didn't fight, she asks softly. Theseus shakes his head. Eventually, I moved first. He didn't even raise his arms. Silence settles. It doesn't feel like a victory. You sit beside him on a low stone bench as he cleans his hands with a damp cloth. The center chamber, he says, smelled like wax and moss and old wood. There were marks on the walls, scratches, hundreds, maybe more. Ariadne whispers. He was counting. No one responds. Later. Theseus leads you both through a small drawing he's made in dust. 3 turns left, then 2 right, up a step, then it loops again. He gestures. There's a narrow part, barely wide enough to breathe through. I thought I was stuck, but then I smelled rosemary. Ariadne nods. She'd mentioned the rosemary earlier. The thread had passed through that stretch. It worked. Her map worked. But you don't celebrate. Instead, you all sit under the early sun, feeling the world reshuffle itself around this quiet conclusion. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur was truly killed or simply abandoned in a sealed chamber. Some suggest the myth was edited to give Theseus a neater ending. Others believe the beast was never real at all, just the embodiment of fear, shame, or political propaganda dressed in hooves and horns. But you've seen the dust on Theseus's palms. You've heard the thread snap just once, then pull true. You've watched Ariadne draw the maze from memory in the dirt. Something happened in there, and it wasn't a clean thing. That afternoon, the palace begins whispering. News travels fast in a place that trades more in stories than coin. Minos doesn't comment. Pasiphae does not appear. Daedalus vanishes into his workshop. But the guards at the maze are replaced, and the thread, your thread, is coiled away by Ariadne with great care. She tucks it into a clay jar and seals the lid with wax, not as a trophy, as a tool, but something to be used again. Should the need arise, Theseus, for all his brawn and bravado, seems quiet now. The shine has worn off. The hero posture has slumped. At one point, you see him tracing spirals on a tile with his thumb. He doesn't talk about the Minotaur again, not once. That evening, you and Ariadne walk along the palace roof. The sea is flat and endless. She pulls her hair back, ties it with a new strip of linen, and finally speaks. There was a time I thought he was a god. You ask who she means. She just says, both of them. Below, the maze remains, empty now, or so you hope, but in the silence, in the chill that clings to its outer walls, you feel the echo of hooves that never truly stopped. And Ariadne, without looking back, walks away. You've seen escape plans sketched on papyrus, scratched into wax tablets, whispered under breath during festival noise. But this one, Ariadne's, is different. It's not rushed, not desperate. It's gentle, polite, even. A soft-footed exit designed with the elegance of someone who has been planning, not just to flee, but to depart well. The morning after the Labyrinth gives up its latest thread-bound guest, the palace is still pretending everything's fine. Ariadne no longer bothers to match the charade. She walks through corridors with unusual purpose, pausing to nod at guards who nod back, unaware they're witnessing a farewell rehearsal. She has a list. You help her tick through it. First, the boat. Not a grand vessel, not the Athenian tribute ship. That one's too loud, too watched. Instead, she's arranged for a small merchant galley anchored in a quiet cove, crewed by 2 old sailors who think they're delivering pomegranates. One is deaf in one ear, the other deeply suspicious of goats. Ariadne says they'll be perfect. Second, provisions, dried figs, salted fish, hard bread, and a clay jug of wine that Theseus insists on sampling prematurely. Ariadne replaces it with water the moment he's distracted by his own reflection in a bronze shield. Third, the weather. She checks the sky like a priestess checks omens, cloud patterns, wind direction, the smell of the tide. You ask how she learned to do that. You can learn anything, she replies, if you grow up in a palace where you're not allowed to leave. The escape itself is timed to a festival, one of those loud, incense-heavy affairs where dancers twirl and the king is too busy pretending to be a god to notice his daughter disappearing through a servant's passage. Theseus is giddy. He's already narrating the story aloud, changing minor details for dramatic effect. And then he begins, for the third time that morning, only to have Ariadne gently stuff a fig in his mouth. You'll tell it later, she says. Right now, we're still part of the story. You're with them as they slip down through the olive grove, torches flickering behind palace windows like blinking eyes. Ariadne carries nothing but a satchel, a spool of thread, and a wax tablet with 2 spirals carved into it. You ask why she brought the thread. Because I never leave without it, she says. You reach the boat. The sailors grunt. One asks if Theseus is the wine delivery. No one corrects him. You board. The oars lower. The sea pulls you from the island like a sigh. It's quiet for a long while. Ariadne sits at the bow, staring back at the receding shape of Benossus, the maze, the palace, the boy she tried to understand, all fading into dawn. She doesn't cry. She doesn't speak. But you can tell she's making peace with the idea that some places you leave, not because you hate them, but because they won't ever change. Historians still argue whether Ariadne chose exile or was forced into it, whether her departure was part of Theseus's plan or a last-minute adjustment. Some say she left for love. Others say she left because she was finally done explaining herself. That night, under the slow stars, she leans against the railing beside you. I never really believed in heroes, she murmurs, just in thread. Theseus snores, curled up on a cargo tarp. He dreams, probably, of laurels and statues. You and Ariadne keep watch instead, quiet, steady, each wave pushing you farther from the center of the spiral and closer to its edge. The sun rises gently over the open sea, staining the waves in diluted copper and brushing Ariadne's cheek with light. You lie beside a coil of rope, watching her braid her hair with the same fingers that once charted an unchartable maze. She's calm, thoughtful, a little windblown. Theseus, on the other hand, is already complaining about the salt in his bread. I thought exile would have better catering, he mutters, picking at a figs. Ariadne doesn't respond. She's already looking ahead after a day and a half at sea. The boat glides toward Naxos, a curved island of rocky cliffs, fig groves, and quiet beaches. It's not grand, not famous, but that's the point. A place forgotten by epics, an island that doesn't demand your tragedy, only your quiet. You arrive at dusk, slipping ashore on smooth stones. The sailors don't linger. They unload the bundles, give a vague wave, and row off without ceremony. Theseus is too busy stretching to notice. He announces he's going to gather firewood, though he returns 30 minutes later with a seashell and a sunburn. Ariadne, in contrast, begins setting up a small shelter. She's done this before. You can tell by how she layers olive branches over a ridgepole with quiet focus. You help her lay out the mats and start a fire. Theseus reclines nearby, practicing heroic poses against the setting sun. The evening air carries the scent of thyme and old rock. Cicadas begin their night-long concert. The sea glimmers like polished glass, and the sky folds from peach into navy. For a moment, everything feels safe. You ask Ariadne what the plan is now. She shrugs. We rest. You press further, and after she ties off a loose thread on her sleeve. After. He'll leave. You blink. He said you'd go to Athens. Ariadne looks out over the water. He says a lot of things. And sure enough, by the third morning, Theseus is gone. No confrontation, no farewell, just footprints leading to the water's edge and a set of oar marks fading in the surf. Ariadne finds a note scratched into a piece of driftwood. It reads, "Sorry, urgent return. I'll send for you." She tosses it into the fire. Historians still argue whether Theseus abandoned her deliberately or was pulled away by divine will, perhaps summoned by Athena or lured by ambitions back home. Some versions say Dionysus appeared and claimed her as his bride. Others simply note she was left. But here, on this beach, the abandonment doesn't erupt. It seeps. Ariadne doesn't scream. She doesn't fall to her knees. She just spends the morning gathering figs. You sit with her under a fig tree that afternoon, watching the tide. She speaks little. When she does, it's mostly to herself. He didn't even take the thread. You ask what she'll do next. She looks up at the branches. Start again. That's all you ever can do. That night. She traces the labyrinth into the sand, not as a prison, not as a map, but as a memory. One spiral, then another, a third, broken midway. You recognize the shape. It's the route Theseus walked, minus the center. He never really understood it, she says, smoothing out a bend with her heel. You ask if she regrets helping him. She thinks, then shakes her head. No. I regret assuming he knew what to do with it. By moonlight, the beach glows silver. Ariadne walks to the waterline, spool in hand, and unwinds a short length of thread into the tide. It drifts, tugs, disappears. You ask if she's sending a message. No, she says. I'm just letting go. The sea accepts the offering. The stars blink overhead, and the thread between myth and woman begins to unravel. Not in despair, but in choice. The days on Naxos stretch long and wide, like fabric laid out to dry, creased by wind, warmed by sun, softened by time. Theseus is gone, and with him, the tension that had crackled like a storm cloud over Ariadne's shoulders. You think she might crumble. Instead, she breathes. No court, no obligations, no corridor whispers, just sea, sun, figs, and silence. You help her gather driftwood for cooking. She teaches you how to split reeds for fish traps. One afternoon, you catch her humming. Nothing grand, just a loose, tuneless thing that loops back on itself like the maze she left behind. Historians often drop the thread here. Ariadne abandoned. End of story. She's painted either as pitiable or forgotten. Another footnote sacrificed to heroic advancement. But that's not what happens on Naxos. What happens is a beginning. One morning, while sorting seaweed from a tide pool, Ariadne spots footprints in the sand. Not hers, not yours. Barefoot, sure-footed, and accompanied by a scent of myrtle and pine. She squints toward the tree line and murmurs, "Visitors." You follow her gaze. A figure stands at the edge of the forest, half shadowed by leaves, robe loose, smile crooked. He says nothing at first, just raises a hand in greeting, as if he's been expected. He is barefoot, sun-browned, and has the kind of calm confidence that doesn't arrive by boat. It just appears. Dionysus, Ariadne says after a pause. You blink. The god, she shrugs. Or just another man in need of direction. He walks towards you, not with a hero's stride, but with a dancer's rhythm. Graceful and strange. His hair is leaf-tangled. His eyes carry a kind of wine-deep mischief, but there's no sharpness to it, only softness. He stops several paces away and kneels, not to worship, but to be level. "Did you bring thread?" she asks. He smiles. "No, I brought patience. You're not sure if it's a line or a miracle." They sit together on the beach and talk, not about labyrinths, not about gods or Athens. They talk about wind patterns, about fermentation, about goats with strong opinions. You leave them there and go watch the tide. When you return, Ariadne is laughing, not dramatically, not as if rescued, just amused. She doesn't fall in love that day, but the idea enters like a breeze through an open window. Over the next few days, Dionysus makes no claims. He doesn't promise kingdoms or revenge or temples. He helps build a new shelter. He knows when to speak and when to simply sit beside her. You catch him once, repairing a sandal, using a thorn and fish gut, muttering praise for the humble engineering of knots. Later, you find him tracing spirals in the sand, unconsciously echoing the same shapes Ariadne once used to map her way out of grief. Historians still argue whether Dionysus married Ariadne, elevated her to divinity, or merely kept her company through a long, healing exile. Some versions say she bore him children, others say she rose to the stars, but none of them capture the quiet of those early days, the shared figs, the sleepy storytelling, the way Ariadne sometimes reaches for a threadless spindle just to keep her hands moving. One evening, as the sun dips into the Aegean like a coin dropped in wine, Dionysus asks her, "Would you rather forget or remember?" She considers it. "Neither," she says. "I'd rather rewrite." He nods. That night, she unties the last knot from her belt and tosses it into the fire. You ask if she'll spin again. She looks at the flames and says, "Eventually," but this time for weaving. The thread that once marked escape becomes material for something new, no longer a guide through confusion, but a warp and weft for a life unbound by corridors or princes or sacrifice. And so, the island holds her gently. The sea hums, the trees lean in, and Ariadne, for the first time in many turns, sleeps without counting. Time thickens on Naxos. It no longer behaves like a calendar, more like waves lapping the same stones, reshaping but never rushing. Ariadne has stopped tracking the days. She ties no threads around her wrist. She draws no spirals in the sand. The labyrinth has finally released her. Instead, she builds. At first, it's small things: a basket, a better thatch roof, a clay jar painted with quiet constellations. Then more ambitious efforts emerge. A loom set between two fig trees, a path of stones from the beach to the shelter, a terrace where wild herbs grow between careful hands. She doesn't speak of Crete, nor of Theseus, nor of the thing in the maze, but she does keep the wax tablet with the spirals, not as a warning, as a memory, one that has stopped hurting. You and Dionysus help her in different ways. You collect reeds and find places where the breeze cools best. He gathers wine grapes and sings off-key while building a bench from driftwood and rope. Neither of you are necessary, but both are welcomed. Ariadne weaves now, not escape routes, but fabric, rich linen, soft from salt air and long rinses. She dyes it with herbs and beetle shells and paints patterns not found in any palace waves. Spirals, eyes closed in sleep. You recognize one motif repeated often: a bull's horn, gently curved, crowned with stars. One evening, she invites you to sit beside her loom as she works. The shuttle clacks back and forth with a rhythm so steady it could lull the sky. Her fingers move like memory, deliberate and forgiving. Did you ever miss it? You ask softly. She doesn't look up. The maze, you nod, a pause. I missed what I tried to do with it, she says, not what it was. Dionysus appears with a basket of overripe figs and a suggestion that the moon is particularly beautiful tonight. Ariadne smiles and follows him down to the shore. There, beneath the calm dome of stars, the three of you lie on the sand. Waves fold and unfold. Owls blink silently in the fig trees. He reaches up and points to the night sky. That cluster, he says, is called Corona Borealis, the northern crown. Ariadne hums, I like the symmetry. It's yours, he says simply. I placed it there. You blink. You what? He grins, shrugging like someone admitting to carving initials in a tree. Gods do things when they're in love. She tilts her head. I thought you didn't believe in grand gestures. He taps the bridge of her nose. That's why I only did one. Historians still argue whether the constellation was named for Ariadne before or after the myth, whether she became divine or remained mortal, whether her crown was placed among the stars as tribute or coincidence. You, having heard the story beneath the story, begin to suspect the answer is simpler. Someone loved her, and someone else finally listened. In time, word of her fate reaches Crete, but by then, Minos is gone, the palace has cracked, the maze is overgrown. The boy's name, Asterion, is spoken by no one, and on Naxos. Ariadne plants pomegranate seeds, not for fruit, just because they're pretty when they bloom. She writes nothing down. She teaches only by example, and when strangers pass through and ask for her story, she simply smiles and says, I used to be someone else. Now I'm just here. And so she is, here, at peace, unthreaded. The seasons shift softly on Naxos. Summer fades like dye in linen, slow and inevitable. Autumn arrives with gentler winds and fewer visitors. Ariadne welcomes the quiet like an old friend. She moves slower now, not from age, but from comfort. The urgency that once coiled in her shoulders has softened into stillness. You find her one morning near the fig trees, humming as she adjusts the woven windscreen beside her loom. The breeze is cooler today, and a faint scent of myrtle hangs in the air. Dionysus is off somewhere chasing a goat that wandered into the herb garden, claiming the animal owes him something, probably a metaphor. Ariadne just shakes her head and smiles. The loom holds a new piece, fine flax threads dyed sea gray, the pattern emerging in spirals, stars, and soft horns. It's a tapestry, yes, but also something else, a memory woven into the future. She calls it the way out. It's not a map, she says when you ask. It's a remembering. You help her prepare pigments, crush berries, soak leaves, heat wax. Every step is deliberate, not ceremonial but reverent, like she's still paying respect to the act of making sense out of chaos, only now with thread instead of escape plans. One afternoon, she takes you to a cave, just inland, carved into the cliffside and filled with birdsong. The walls are cool. The light slips in sideways. There. She places a small stone marked with a spiral. No inscription, just the symbol. She leaves it tucked into a niche near the entrance. What is this place, you ask? She shrugs. A space for remembering or forgetting, whichever's needed. The quiet here is not heavy. It holds you, like thread pulled snug, not tight. She breathes in the air, then says, he wasn't a monster. You know who she means? No. You say? He wasn't, just misplaced. Historians still argue whether the Minotaur was Ariadne's brother, or a political allegory, or the subconscious stitched into myth. But here, on this island, he's become something else, a part of her story that no longer wounds. In the evenings, Dionysus tells stories to no one in particular. Fish that sang, bees that held grudges, a grapevine that tried to rule a kingdom. You and Ariadne listen from the doorway, heads tilted, mouths curled in that particular expression worn only by those who know this piece wasn't given. It was built. One night, beneath a blanket of stars. Ariadne picks up the thread again. Not the same one, of course. That one was left behind, but a new skein. She begins weaving, not maps or exits, but comfort, a shawl, a rug, a wall hanging. You sit beside her, listening to the shuttle pass back and forth. She looks up. Do you think people ever truly leave their labyrinths? You pause. Only when they stop needing to. She nods. That's what I thought. And in that moment, as the sea sighs and the fig trees rustle and the stars settle into their nightly positions, Ariadne begins to hum again. The tune is not ancient, not sacred, just hers, and the world, slowly, gently, begins to forget the prince who left her, the maze that trapped her, and the monster no one truly knew, and instead, it remembers the woman who spun her way out, not with heroism, but with patience, not with violence, but with thread. And now, as the final threads of this story loosen, let yourself drift. Let the image of the sea return, the gentle hush of waves brushing Naxos' shore. Feel the faint warmth of fig leaves shading your brow, and the soft pull of sleep gathering in your limbs like tide water in a quiet cove. Ariadne has no more corridors to map. The thread rests beside her now, no longer a lifeline, just a spool of possibility. The labyrinth is far behind, its walls faded, its echoes long gone. Only the spiral remains, gentle and unthreatening, like the curve of a shell in the sand. No monsters, no mazes, just the soft repetition of weaving, of waves, of breath. You're safe now. No turns left to take, no decisions waiting in the dark. Only the comfort of stillness, the calm of stories finished well, and the soft space between night and sleep. Breathe in deeply. Let your thoughts, like Ariadne's old maps, blur and unspool. Let the names fade. Let the myths soften. Let even the stars blink slowly out, one by one, until only your breath remains. And somewhere, far in the distance, the thread curls gently beside you, no longer needed, but always there.